Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Carrie and Dani. Carrie, have you got your tissues?
No. Shoot. Oh, no, actually I do. Look, right here.
That's a big box of it's a big box of tissues. So the reason I asked if you've got your tissues is because I was thinking, we mentioned in our last meeting right at the
Hmm.
end, we talked about, the sadness attached to not being part of that whole big thing to do with Pathfinders and that
Hmm.
sense of community and belonging. And I touched briefly on my weekly routine, and I thought, you know what? Why don't we just dive into that rabbit hole a little deeper and see where we end up?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
It,
so
it's
I
a
was sort of,
huge difference. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, I was thinking about the unexpected grief of leaving Adventism, the things that, now that it's been a year or two out, that we maybe didn't consider
Hmm.
until we got this far along. And I shared one that's just a little simple one, but it's like a good starting point for me, was to realize that I'd lost part of my weekly routine because Adventism, actually, I got to say, I think it was Mike that used the words actually, but I loved how it sounded that
Hmm.
Adventism was the water that you swam in. It was just the air of your everyday life.
Hmm.
It was all encompassing. There was nothing outside of it. And it was so built into my DNA and my routines, the whole weekly. You get
Hmm.
ready for Sabbath, you recover from Sabbath, you've got your weekly stuff to do, and then you're always thinking about the set aside thing that's part of the week that's to come. And
Hmm.
it was just interesting to stop. I thought, oh, maybe I'm just getting a bit lazy in my old age, or maybe I don't know. And so to suddenly,
Hmm.
it was about 3 or 4 days ago, to stop and go, oh, oh, when I left Adventism, I lost my weekly routine. I didn't have to
Hmm.
lose it. It was just I didn't even know I'd lost it until a couple of days ago, and I was just like, wow. Uh, when the whole new covenant thing sunk in, and I realized that the Sabbath wasn't everything I'd been, Saturday wasn't everything I'd have been sold to me as. And I wasn't keeping it properly anyway. If you're going to keep all those proper laws, you need to go proper Jewish and do it properly,
Oh,
not just
yeah.
keep a wee fraction of them and feel
Yep.
righteous.
Yep.
Anyways, outside of that, I realized that I'd lost the routine of my cleaning day.
Hmm.
Um, and then you said something else about other things, and I realized that there was something extra as well that for not my whole life, but at least 75% of my life, there was something special also about that whole cleaning day thing on Friday. And that is for a lot of my life, Friday was really, really busy and it was a day of cleaning. And I've realized now that I need to find a new cleaning day. I need to structure things.
Hmm.
And it was just something I unexpectedly lost when I left Adventism.
Hmm. Oh, you have paused.
But I
There
realized
you
that
go.
Fridays, all fires and Christian movies, they were
Hmm.
no television nights. They had, oh, am I back?
You're back now.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Friday nights were also they were like an extra special connection night. So like Saturdays could be long and boring and depressing, but Friday nights were normally Vesper nights at church and youth get together
Hmm.
nights. And then when we lived way out in the country on a dairy farm, they were light the fire and play Bible games and talk to the
Hmm.
cat nights. And
Hmm.
so it was just, yeah. There's no reason you still can't do those things, but it was just things that I hadn't realized I'd lost that were built into the DNA of being an Adventist. And there's actually more things. I started writing them down once I started thinking about it. But tell
Hmm.
me about some of yours, because you also talked about the Pathfinder one. And
Hmm. Well, I think it's the greater sense of community too, and being able to show up, or as you would say, rock up to to any other Adventist institution in the world, more than likely, and be able to be part of the broader community. I think more personally as well. Um, so for me, the majority of my time as an Adventist, as an adult, was being a pastor's wife.
Yep.
So Sabbath for me was different than for many people. It was not necessarily a day of rest for us. Um, when the kids were small, my husband would leave early to go to church, and I'd get there when I got there with the kids,
Uh-huh.
and I would be usually there was a church member or two that would help me out with the kiddos during church. A lot of times I'd spend time in the nursery, in the mother's room watching the service and everything. So um that I mean that necessarily wasn't a loss because Sabbath to me was not necessarily a day of rest at
It
all.
sounds exhausting
It was
and
exhausting.
disconnecting.
It was exhausting. And we would usually, Sabbath afternoon, typically my husband we'd come home and we made an agreement when the kids were small enough they needed supervision that, okay,
Hmm.
you go rest for an hour and then we'll take turns. Then I'll go rest for an hour, so then we could at least um get some rest in. But as a kid, I Sabbath was more restful, I think, because as a child you don't have all the dinner preparation
Yep.
stress like your mom would have had or my mom did. Um and we'd go for nature walks at the nature center. We would maybe go canoeing. We would there was always opportunities for community on Sabbath afternoon. You always knew Sabbath afternoon was a time that you could contact your friends and they wouldn't have something else they had to do.
Yep. Um, yeah. So it was like a pre-built-in social club that you had to do no
Hmm.
work to maintain.
Yeah. Yeah. You just, I mean, if you saw somebody at church and you're like, hey, let's go canoeing this afternoon or let's go hiking, chances are they didn't have any other plans.
I was just thinking that you read a lot, and when I was working as a school counselor, never thought about it till now. I'd talk to the kids about friends, and it can be, you need to make an effort, and it can be hard work maintaining a friendship, and blah blah blah. But when I think back on it, growing up in the church, it actually wasn't because it just was.
You saw your
You did,
friends if you went to a
ev-
church school, you saw your friends every day.
yep, and
If
then it
you
was
went
already planned in for the weekends.
and you plan and you do sleepovers or you would do whatever,
Yeah.
you know.
But it was pre-planned.
Yeah,
Vespers Friday night, you'd see them. I'd see them at
yep,
church, and
yep,
then church lunch, and then every second Saturday afternoon we had Pathfinders, so I'd see them there. I'd see them at the activities, and then once or twice a month, the church would
hmm.
have social nights on a Saturday night, so you saw them there.
Or you could sit
I was just
together at potluck and chat, you
I was just
know.
thinking that friendship was pre-built in. Um, do you still have anything with that? So it took me a while to realize about the grief of that. And I have a girlfriend that lives at the top of the North Island that's also left. And it was so funny. I found that every Saturday I'd think about my friend Sherelle and I'd be on the internet and I'm like messaging her Saturday mornings, every Saturday morning for about 6 months. I'm like, I was just thinking about you today for some reason. And then I'm like, hang on. There's a pattern to this. I'm thinking about you today. I never message her on a Wednesday going, I'm thinking about you today for some reason. I only
Hmm.
message her on Saturdays. Why do I message her Saturday mornings? Oh, because there's an empty gap and a hole of my life that I haven't actually thought about and dealt with yet.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, because that's just we had our built-in social structure, and like you said, there just wasn't an effort. You didn't necessarily have to make an effort to maintain relationships with people. Unfortunately, those relationships were also pretty superficial and churchy, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to share your struggles with your church friends. I mean, you should be able to. The church friends I have now, I think I would feel comfortable with doing that. But oh, Sylvester wants to say hi to you, Danny. He knows you love his whiskers.
Oh, he's so cute.
He's a
What
little
else?
stinker. He's my fluffy. Anyway, it and that's part of it is like, yeah, the friendships were there, but I mean, were they really super deep, you know?
Um, I don't know. As a kid, it was all I knew.
Yeah.
There's so a couple of other things. So I was watching an episode of Restaurant Impossible yesterday. I
Hmm.
was I decided to have breakfast with the television running, and just so I was watching that, so I eat slower. I don't know. I just I'm so embarrassed to admit it. I was watching an old rerun of Restaurant Impossible, something from like 2012, and the people were going, "I can't lose this restaurant. It's my family legacy. This is what my parents did to make it happen." And I want to, the family traditions are important, and I want to pass the traditions down to my kids. And I'd never stopped to think. I mean, I've seen some of it. It's not a new thought. It's not a new story, but it was new the way I applied it to my life. So the application and the thought that I had, for probably one of the first times was my nana sacrificed. My nan ate cold food on Saturdays. My nan wouldn't shower even when you could turn the tap and hot water came out, she wouldn't shower. I remember Granny on the other side, they didn't have hot running water in the house, so I can remember it 7 and 8 years old, probably somewhere in there, boiling the copper out on the laundry and carrying buckets of water into the house for a bath. But there was cold running water, so I understand why that didn't happen on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, so my grandparents and great grandparents on the other side, they changed their whole lives. They gave
Mm-hmm.
up. They gave up. They just all the traditions and legacies that they passed through are all connected to church stuff. And I was thinking that I've changed all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've changed all of that. And I mean, it's not enough to make me stay, but it was
No.
just sometimes all the little tiny losses can build up to something that's heavy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you can pick up one feather quilt and it's fine, but by the time you're carrying 15 of them, they're heavy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I guess
Yeah.
I was thinking about the little grief about things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, for you, I guess for me it's a little bit different, but for you, you've got kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, there's a direct flow on in some ways to
Mm-hmm.
your actions.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I was thinking about this last week is, I guess it was about identity. About
Mm-hmm.
identity and about story. And I was listening to some John Eldridge stuff, and he was talking about desire, the journey of desire. And that always just hits me because they were saying, we're told our heart is bad, but under the new covenant, you get a new heart and your heart is good. And I was never taught that as an Adventist. I was
Mm-mm.
never taught you're under a new covenant, you've got a new heart, your heart is good. I was taught, yes, you're going to church. Yes, you've asked for forgiveness. Yes, God lives in your heart, but there's still the hard work of sanctification, and you're a dirty, rotten, blah, 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 blah. And so a lot of the Bible
Mm-hmm.
verses that talk about the heart didn't make sense to me. But outside of that, so back to identity, where it got
Mm-hmm.
me traveling along this thought of identity. As an Adventist, I had a story that was my story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I was born into the world like Joan of Arc for a time such as this, the story of Esther. The story
Oh,
of Esther
yep.
was applied.
Yep.
You were born for a time such as this. God is coming back in your lifetime. You are going to be tortured, locked up, persecuted. And
Mm-hmm.
like Joan of Arc and Esther, you were born for a time such as this. There is a grand meaning and a story for your life. You should be thrilled that you're going to be tortured one day for God. And I was never thrilled that I was going to be tortured for God. I'm sorry, that was never excited me.
No,
I
I'm a
don't have
giant
any
wimp.
tender feelings.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Mm. I mean,
Nope.
I can remember praying, "Oh Lord, can you kill me before the end of time?" And when I
Right?
do die, can you like make it fast and painless? I was so scared. All the stories about being tortured for God left me fearful that I was going to die slowly and painfully.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Yeah.
used to pray, just let me die fast. Um, and so, but that's even though it's traumatic, there was still a story and a purpose. Like I knew what the purpose for my life was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I knew the story of where I came from as far
Mm-hmm.
back as the Great Controversy story. And I had a story and a whole plan. I was given at birth a plan for my future. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't told what my job was going to be, as in my worldly job,
Sure.
whether that was going to be a butcher, baker, or candlestick maker. Um, Obviously not a butcher if you're an Adventist.
Well, no.
Um,
Tofu maker.
but I was given a plan for my whole life.
Hmm.
From the moment I was old enough to hear it, I knew that my plan was to potentially one day be, tortured or persecuted for God. And I knew this whole story. I knew that the Sunday law was going to happen. I knew that this was going to happen, and there was an exact order. Um, and then there was a whole future. It didn't matter how awful life here on earth was because I had a whole future um, in heaven, which I was
Hmm.
never excited about because it sounded like there was going to be lots of singing and harp playing. And I was always felt guilty about not being more excited about heaven, to be honest. But that's another whole story. I was
Uh-huh.
still, I lived in a story that I was 100% confident of.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I've lost my story.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with not knowing, but there's still a grief
Mhm.
attached to not having, it's like,
Mhm.
I don't know what the end of time holds now. I
Right.
don't know what the exact order of things are. I don't know if I even, I, I don't believe necessarily that, I don't believe necessarily that, I don't know. I
Yeah.
no longer feel the whole, I was born for a time such as this. You can persecute me all you want because I am right.
Hmm. Yeah.
I've lost, I did, yeah. Tell me about it. Have you considered these things? Have you thought about you were born into a giant story and that story now no longer exists?
Well, and I've often thought, and one thing that I when I talk to people in my new church or other things is I grew up in a world of very black and white.
Yep,
Like you knew exactly what was right and you knew exactly what was wrong, and there was
yep,
very little gray, if any. And there was the assurance that you were right. Your church was right. You knew what was going to happen. And it's been, I mean, I'm sure over the last decade, even, I'm like, what if we're not right? Like as far as like the end times, the eschatology and all of that stuff. What if we've got this wrong? Because it always seemed to me a little tenuous, but Daniel and Revelation was never my favorite, talking about the end
Mm.
times and all of that stuff. So I kind of just suppressed it and moved on. Like I'm not thinking about this. But now, um, like I'm okay with not knowing exactly what's going to happen. I'm okay with not being right now or being, but there is that loss of that, not necessarily moral compass because it's more than that.
yep.
But I think I had doubts for a long time as
Well,
far as Ellen White and the assurance, like the whole. I think part of that started with the whole dietary stuff. You know, all of that. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. This is ridiculous. And um, my husband being a pastor, he was always a very moderate, more on the progressive side. Anyway, um, but yeah, there's certainly a loss of identity, I think is kind of like the big thing too. Because, but yet, were you ever, um, when somebody asked you where you went to church, or it came up in conversation, when you
oh,
said
I
you
didn't
were a
tell them. I
Seventh-day
was so,
Adventist,
oh, no, 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 no.
did you want to tell people?
No, I was so embarrassed for the last, so I
It
never
just
had
made
that
me
same problem.
uncomfy because I'm like, how they're going to ask all these questions and I'm not going to be able to explain myself.
I never doubted Alan White until 3 years ago.
Really?
Not even that long, maybe 2 years ago. No, and I never doubted it. I mean,
Hmm.
there was there was never a space in my life to doubt it. And there were times when so my story might not always make sense because I talk about the times when I was a really conservative Adventist. But in
Hmm.
between those times, there were times when I went out and I would go night clubbing and dancing. I went through that sometime in my early 30s, actually, when I got divorced.
Hmm.
Um, and again, there was a short period of time at around 18 or 19, somewhere in there, 19 or 20, when I would go out dancing with my girlfriends on sometimes on a Friday night, and then, but I still always was exhausted, tired, or whatever. I was still always at church on Saturday.
Hmm.
And so there were times in my life where my story might not make sense because there were times in my life when I considered myself to be a bad Adventist.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so there were times, many times, when I'd say, people would say, "What church do you go to?" And I'd say, "Oh, well, um, I grew up in the Adventist church, but I'm a really bad one, so don't judge all of them by me." And then somewhere in my late 30s or late 30s, that changed to, "What church did you grow up in?" And I'd just say, "Oh, well," or what religion are you? And I'd say, "Oh, well, I don't really identify with any organized religion. I prefer to call myself friends with God," as a way around it. But the truth is, I've always known there were periods in my time when I was a bad Adventist, and I was perfectly happy with being a bad Adventist.
Hmm.
Because you're still an Adventist. If you're a bad one, you're still one. You're still part
Hmm.
of the story. You haven't lost your identity. So I don't know, it'd be 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago. Um, the thought of actually leaving was really hard, which is strange because the super conservative Adventist would look at it and say, "Oh, well, you already left quite a few times." But I didn't leave. I was just a bad Adventist.
Right.
Being a bad one's not the same as taking your name off the roll and leaving.
Hmm.
And it's just, yeah, it's odd. It's
It's a story I'm pretty familiar with. I mean, the reality is so many people out there still say they're an Adventist. Their names are still on the books. Have they been, they're like, "Oh, I'm an Adventist, but I'm a bad one." We there was a family, I think I may have told this story on this channel before, but it bears repeating, I think. Um, there was a family that attended one of the churches my husband pastored early on in his career. And what do you, the cat's sneezing. I'm gonna kick him out. Anyway, um, and they had been, it was a couple and there's a whole family, there's many people part of it. And they had left the church. I mean, not left because their names were still on the books, but they hadn't been to church in probably 10 years.
yeah,
They'd been living together for a long time. They drank, they smoked. There was nothing really about them that would say Adventist, okay?
yeah,
But you'd go to their, but don't you dare bring pork into their house because they're Seventh-day Adventist.
yeah.
So
Well,
they
see,
cling, so there's certain things that people will cling to, which in the grand scheme of things, so that was presented to them as super, super important to maintain their identity as an Adventist. Just don't eat pork, is how they were
yeah,
just, I think that was just they're still their foot in the door. And I always found that just fascinating to me. And I think that it can make sense. I mean, I have come across all of the Adventists, all of the kinds, you know. And so like, yeah, I've heard that story before. Somebody says they're a Seventh-day Adventist, but not a good one.
yeah.
Similar to somebody who says they're Catholic and only goes maybe for Christmas or Easter.
It
I
occurs
don't
to me
know.
when listening to you talk, it just occurs to me that people treat me differently. Okay. When I was a bad Adventist, I was someone to be prayed for and cared about and concerned over. Now that I've just left the Adventist church, I'm like a person, you're just like, "Who are you?"
There was still hope when your name was on the books.
And stuff. And it's there's things that are harder to put into words that you lose too.
Hmm.
Okay. So like with my horses, I changed my training methods. I still a lot
Hmm.
of natural
Hmm.
horsemanship. And someone said to me once, like, maybe like 10, probably 12 years ago now, they said to me, if your horse is not allowed to say no, can it ever say yes?
Hmm.
Now that took me 2 years to ponder, because I expected my horse to do as it was told.
Right.
And that seemed perfectly normal to me. And most horse owners would tell you that's normal. You tell your horse to do something, it's supposed to do as it's told.
Hmm.
All the training methods are geared towards that, except for this one where they're like, can your horse say yes if it's not allowed to say no? So after a couple of years, that just like sunk into my head. And I thought, you know what? I need a new training method. So I stopped my old training method. And for 5 years, I didn't really do any horse training, barely rode my horses. And I didn't do any training or anything much because I didn't know what the new training method was going to be. I didn't want to force them to do things. And the whole natural horsemanship thing's not natural. There's nothing natural about swinging a rope at your horse and stopping. There's nothing that people say it's about pressure and release. You apply pressure to your horse, and when
Hmm.
it does what you want, you release the pressure. That's not natural. The pressure's not natural. The pressure didn't exist until I applied it. There's nothing natural about it. It may be a good training method, but
Hmm.
there's nothing natural about it. The pressure did not exist until I put the pressure there. So I did nothing for all these years, and then I found a new way of training. Um, but all the reason I did nothing is because my decisions about what to do with my horses, how to deal with them when they didn't want to get an injection and they maybe needed penicillin because they'd had an accident and all those things, was based on my previous training method. And so I feel Adventism's a little bit like that. Okay. One, there's nothing natural about the training methods.
Hmm.
Um, how can I ever actually say yes to God when there was never actually a place or a time that I was allowed to say no? It was
Right.
never a
Yeah.
conscious choice. I was born being told I had said yes.
Hmm.
I was, yeah, born being told I'd said yes. I was lucky to be born into this
Hmm.
religion and you used a term in one of our conversations about some of the arguments of why Adventism has some of the doctrines wrong never sinks into some people because you are pre-inoculated
Yes.
with
Yep.
those questions. And so
Yeah.
that was definitely a thing for me. I had already been taught answers to things that people
Hmm.
might bring up, so the questions never sunk in. I was pre-inoculated from such a really young age, hence why I ended up being so old when I realized that I hadn't been told a whole truth.
Hmm.
Um, and then, but there was a whole framework. There was a framework for every decision I made within the Adventist church. You know, if you look at why you're in the world, what you're supposed to be doing, what the job is God's given you,
Hmm.
and then all that stuff, there's a framework for every decision you make.
Yeah.
Everything. And sometimes the framework's as simple as if I do this, who's going to see it and think that it's okay for them to do it as well? Because all things, and then maybe they're going to stumble because while it's not a sin for me to have pepper on my eggs, Ella might say you shouldn't eat pepper, it excites the senses. It might be a sin for someone else that can't cope. So therefore, who's going to see this and stumble, and it'll be my fault they didn't get to heaven. And the Bible's really clear. It's better to hang a millstone around your neck and drown yourself than to cause someone else to sin. I mean,
Hmm.
talk about brainwashing codependency into people.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Um, there, so outside of all that, there was a framework for everything. Like you said, there's no black and white, no shade. It's all black and white, no shades of grey. There's a framework for everything. And then
Hmm.
all of a sudden, when you leave Adventism and you realize you've been sold a lie, the framework for all your decisions, past, present, and future, the benchmarks, they just sort of vanish.
Yeah.
And you've got to find a whole new set of them.
You got to find a whole new structure for your weekly cleaning routine to the decisions that you make on a daily basis interacting with other people.
Um,
And I think that trying to stick with just the gospels, like because that's what Peter Dixon does with his, the Good News Fellowship. Try to stay with the gospels and
yeah,
try to keep it simple, because I think Adventism and other religions, high control or whatever, overcomplicate life, you
They're
know?
not simple. Yeah.
So complicated, is so it's tough, you know?
You, you know what you said before about oh, my brain's gone fuzzy. It keeps going on rabbit holes, but you said something about um end of time. But when you realize the church may not be right, and you keep thinking this,
Hmm.
there's something not right about this. See, I feel that I was pre-inoculated for that feeling, so it never meant anything. That feeling never occurred to me and never come in because I was told in church schools every day almost, we had Bible class every day. We were told from the earliest age that I can remember. Um, I was told, not we, because different. I was told it doesn't matter if you ever have that thought, Danielle, that maybe Adventism is wrong or there's something not right. You just need to consider, what have you lost? Nothing. You've still lived a moral life, an alcohol-free life, an affair-free life. You've still lived this really, really good, righteous life. So even if Adventism is wrong, you will get to the end of your life and know that you had a quality, righteous life, believing that somebody loved you, even if that someone's only God.
Hmm.
So why would you want to leave that, even if it's wrong?
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Did you get told this stuff as well, or is it just where I was going?
I'm trying to think exactly how that was presented, but um it was never presented that it was ever a possibility that Adventism could be wrong. I mean, it was always that brighter minds than I have figured it out. I've said, I know we've said this before, we're not theologians. Well, the theologians have figured it out, so we might as well just trust that what they've figured out is fine. But then if you are limited to reading only Adventist authors, only Ellen White, only the Bible, how are you ever presented an opinion or a belief system that might not be what you have? So I know I've heard that our former GC president Ted Wilson would only read the Bible and Ellen White. So how can you know what you're doing is right if you've never looked at your other options? If you're always picking A, but you never get to see what B, C, and D are,
Can't.
you can't, you know? So,
But
and
again, it was that they told us you don't need to look at the options to know that you're right.
right, and
Aren't you lucky that you don't have to go down through those bad
right,
experiences
somebody's,
and the
don't
pain of
worry
the
your,
world to find out that
don't
you're
worry
right?
your pretty little head about it. We've got it all figured out for you. We'll tell you so that's where it's kind of fun to read and learn new things and see things from other people's perspective. And I think that's where, for myself, you're talking about the end times beliefs and everything, and in the Sunday law and all this stuff, and worshiping on Saturday, not worshiping on Saturday. And I'm thinking, okay, what about the Jews? What about the Muslims? What about everybody else who has other belief systems? Because our end times, the Adventist end times belief system is focused on Christians. Protestant, the Sunday keeper non-Catholics and the Catholics versus the Adventists. They never factor in all of the other people. And Christianity is just a fraction of the people that live on this earth now. So I
It's
think for me, that was where it just started to kind of slowly
yeah,
fall apart a little bit.
yeah. Um, Back to the statement I made in the beginning about the unexpected grief or losses of leaving Adventism. I still keep coming back to the whole, as an Adventist, I lived inside a story.
Hmm.
And when I left, I lost the story.
Hmm.
And while I'm not saying that this isn't a thing that's hard to get past, I'm just coming back to it to highlight it again because I don't like the thought of people running around with unresolved grief And maybe they haven't stopped to think about it yet because they're still in the middle of the leaving process, or they left and there's still the whole big shiny thing that they're aiming towards.
Hmm.
And I still think sometimes we need to just stop and tally up the things we lost, because if you don't know what you've lost, you don't always know what it is that maybe. If I don't stop and think I've lost a story, then I might not read the Bible and talk to God looking for another one. I might still have the hooks of the old story stuck in me
Yeah. And
because it's so comfortable and it's been there for 50 years.
yeah, and I have found right now I'm in the stage of life where there's a lot of what do I do now? You know, empty nester, kids are virtually gone. One still is at home, but I hardly see him. He works second shift, you know.
Yeah.
Other one's off at college most of the time. And a new belief system, new way of life. And you're like, okay, so now I can start writing my own story instead of being stuck in a story that somebody else wrote for me. Of course, do I want help writing that story through scripture and a belief system with God as a center of it? Because I haven't given up on my belief in Jesus. I have not. That's still there. So we
Mm.
have this opportunity now to write our own story, do what we want instead of being our entire lives being dictated by a more high control belief system. Some people may argue that, oh no, your entire life wasn't dictated. It kind of was.
Well, that's where it's complicated because
Yeah.
I didn't believe my life was dictated by a belief system, because I was happy with the belief system and I believed it. It
Hmm.
didn't become that till I left and I saw it in a different light.
Well, and we have like 2 minutes left. But for
Big
me,
topic.
being married to a church employee for, I mean, I think he was almost 20 years. He was
Uh-huh.
employed by the church, less than 20, but um so then it was part of that. It is part of the belief system because, or part of our lives, the church was, because that was his job, you know.
Yeah.
So as the spouse of somebody who works for the church, then of course you're expected to believe and live a certain way because of course your husband is part of this denomination, which makes sense. So now it's you're grieving the kind of the loss of your story, uh and how you thought your life was going to look the rest of the way. But then there's also the joy in realizing the freedom of being able to write your own story, you know.
Yeah. You had definitely more layers of story wrapped around you than I did being a pastor's wife.
Oh
There were
yeah.
more entanglements and greater expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Well, folks, if you have anything else you'd like to add to our conversation about writing your own story, being part of a new story, if you're
Any
still,
unexpected griefs
oh
that we
yes,
haven't covered?
yep, yeah, because there's a lot of those. You might just go through your day and something's just going to hit you, that you miss something, potlucks or, all of those things are important. But comment, like, subscribe. We'll see you on the next one. We'll come up with something else nice to talk about and hopefully get some creative juices flowing and get some good conversations going. So I hope everybody has a great day. We'll talk to you all later. Bye, folks.